Welcome to the Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for FanSided and ZoneCoverage.com, and we do this right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day, but however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode, and we can spread the word to the masses. On today's show, you see our guest on the screen right now. Actually, we're recording with a different thing, so you will see our guest when he speaks here, but you can read his work as the Purple Insider Substack, and you can listen to his musings on the Purple Insider podcast. His name is Matthew Coller. Matthew, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back. I was just commenting to you before we went on that it feels like the Viking season sort of ended a long time ago. And then it also feels like it hasn't ended yet because there is so much still up in the air. So it's the team that never lets us sleep. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I was thinking about it because you have a bit on your show with Ben Gessling of the Star Tribune, and it's the crystal ball bit. You busted because I believe, if I remember the story correctly, Mike Zimmer said, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know these things. And, you look into your ball, whoa, not going to steal your bit. But instead, I want to fire up the DeLorean. I want to go 1.21 gigawatts. I want to fire that thing up, go back to last summer. That was the last time we had you on. Everybody was excited. Everybody was on the same page, buying into JJ McCarthy. We were all going to go to the playoffs in March, kind of like you were saying, preparing for the Seahawks or the Rams or the Bears or whoever was in our path. Well, a lot of people were wrong, and especially on the quarterback. That's the main talker here. Everybody wants to know what the Vikings are going to do at quarterback. Kevin O'Connell says he wants a competitive situation in the room. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah did not commit to JJ McCarthy as the starter in 2026, and the rumor mill is churning. So what is the most likely scenario the Vikings will have at quarterback in 2026?
Yeah, I think that what O'Connell was saying is, accurate, right? Any team that was fully committed to their quarterback would say, why are you asking about the quarterback? He's QB1. If you look at the New England Patriots with Drake May, their backup quarterback, Vikings fans know him well. It is Josh Dobbs, which really shows you they didn't bring in any competition for Drake May in year two. That was their due. They were fully committed to that. So when you talk about wanting to have competition for JJ McCarthy, it tells you that, yeah, your eyes were not lying to you and the numbers are not lying to you, that historically speaking, through 10 starts, if you look at guys that were not the first, second, or third overall draft pick, so we're talking picks, 5 through 64 or something, and you look at how JJ McCarthy's numbers stack up, and I know there's some unique circumstances there, but they stack up to a lot of guys that were not starting quarterbacks for many years. And is that completely fair to JJ McCarthy? No, of course it isn't. But the NFL doesn't go by fairness. It goes by, as Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah said, the franchise has to get back to the playoffs. And that was how he started his answer, which tells me that they're looking for a quarterback that, if JJ McCarthy can't beat them out, could take them to the playoffs. And what that does is that really limits the number of names. You could probably come up with, for quarterbacks that would offer competition, 15 different guys. But when you set the bar at whatever quarterback they get has to be capable of taking them to the postseason, that cuts it down to me for probably less than 7 or 8 quarterbacks. And the guy that I keep bringing up on my show, and people want to assault me through the YouTube screen, is Kyler Murray. I think he will be released, and there's a chance that Murray would want to go to the Sam Darnold route of quarterback rehab, which is go play with Justin Jefferson in an offense that previously had very good quarterback numbers before this year. And I think if you're the Vikings, you look at his history when he's played 17 games, when that team has been even remotely competent, he's played pretty well. Now, has he played amazing? No, but no one who's on the market has played amazing. Otherwise, they're not on the market. And the other name that comes to mind is Kirk Cousins. Kirk said on the Netflix documentary that he wanted to be, if he could have done it again, he would have stayed in Minnesota and said, forget the money. I'm going to be the bridge quarterback for the Vikings instead, because I had a good situation there with the organization, the coach, my family, the receivers, everything else. and should have maybe taken a pay cut and continued to be a Viking. I think it worked out better for the Vikings that they got Sam Darnold for 2024, but either way, he played the Atlanta Falcons into a few wins at the end of the season and looked a lot more like the old Kirk than he did in 2024 coming off his injury. And then you start to go, well, Rodgers, is he going to retire? Kind of feels like he is. Malik Willis, but he's going to have a bunch of different options. And Mac Jones, you have to trade for him, but maybe, the 49ers did trade Jordan Mason here last year, so it's possible that they would consider that. So then you get into which guy would actually be competition, which guy would really just be the starter as soon as you got him. But I don't think that the list of names goes much beyond that. So I think we could kind of narrow it down to they're going to acquire one of these guys. We just don't know which one. And we don't know, is it real competition for McCarthy, or are they going out into the free agent or trade market looking for a starting quarterback? And I will also leave the door open just a crack that if a team like Cincinnati, Baltimore, or the Chargers wanted to trade their star quarterback, the one chip that the Vikings have is a young quarterback on a rookie contract that they could trade. I don't think there's any chance in the world that happens, but at least they have a card that they could play that almost every other team could not in a potential trade.
Yeah, and the McCarthy thing is interesting. Before we get to McCarthy, because I have some thoughts on him as well, but I also think that the Vikings kind of handcuffed themselves into a certain kind of quarterback. So you mentioned Kyler Murray, and when you look at the stats, he's very good throwing the ball downfield. He's very, he's got an arm. He can make all the throws and make plays and everything else. We also wonder on the show sometimes, the Vikings might handcuff themselves in which quarterbacks they can get because Kevin O'Connell wants them to play a certain way. You remember Josh Dobbs coming here. They traded for him. Everybody was kind of like, well, why don't you do some of that playmaking stuff? And it's like, no, our offense has them go downfield. JJ McCarthy was kind of the same thing where, they sat there and they're like, we want you to throw the ball downfield, make, hunt big plays. They talked about hunting explosive plays again in the press conference this week. The only problem is when JJ McCarthy does that, he has the arm to do it. It's just going to Wally the Beer Man instead of Justin Jefferson. A guy like Kyle Murray, is his improvisation a little too much for Kevin O'Connell to handle? Because I think Kevin O'Connell is smart enough to go, hey, this guy's a little bit different quarterback. Let's mix in a couple of things, because we saw some zone reads with McCarthy this year. But I also wonder, if you do sign a Kyler Murray, are we going to be in week 8 and being like, hey, why aren't you using this playmaking ability a little bit more? And why does O'Connell have less hair? Because Kyler Murray's running around trying to make plays.
Yeah, it is an interesting dynamic. I don't think that he was against Josh Dobbs running. I think with Josh Dobbs, the issue, and I call it an issue, but tell me what strategy was supposed to work with Josh Dobbs. He's like 3-12 as a career starter. I mean, this is not that. I always found that criticism to be a little dubious. Now, there was a specific game against Chicago where they threw 35 times and he had like 3 interceptions. And to me, that was just leaning on Josh Dobbs way more than you should. But they also did not have an effective running game that year either, because Alexander Mattison just wasn't very good. And they had put kind of their chips on him as their running back. So every one of these things that has sort of become platitudes about Kevin O'Connell, I kind of think we should question. I mean, one, they did not keep Kirk Cousins in favor of going and getting better athletes at the quarterback position, Sam Darnold, and especially JJ McCarthy, whose athleticism is a major part of his value. So that was one of the reasons, was to try to get a quarterback who, let's say if Dexter Lawrence breaks through the line, just, thinking of any old scenario here, and instead of checking down on 4th down, you could run away. I mean, I think they've always wanted that in their quarterback. Now, Murray, the challenge of trying to sort of put him into a box where he's a drop back quarterback, it is a challenge. But here's one thing I want to point out about Kyler Murray. Absolutely no one who is a Vikings fan watched Kyler Murray in 2024, except for the game he played against the Vikings. I promise you, no one saw any games, because when you look back, it was for the first time in his career where he actually was playing from the pocket a lot more under Drew Petzing in that offense. And Petzing's offense was rooted in Kevin Stefanski. He was the wide receivers coach for the Vikings when Stefanski was here, if I have the timeline right. I think that's right. So there's roots in that Kubiak style with Drew Petzing. And I've got the numbers right here, Chris, that in 2024, Kyler Murray was 12th in terms of the percentage of dropbacks where he threw the ball under 2.5 seconds. So that would be presumably like throwing on time. And it wasn't all screen passes either. Like his percentage of throws behind the line of scrimmage is very average in the NFL. So he was actually playing more on time recently than he was early in his career, where it felt like he was just scrambling all over the place. And another stat to throw out there for you would be his performance with DeAndre Hopkins. And this, look, I want to stop and say that I don't think this is a great quarterback. Like, I don't think this is your franchise dream is to have a quarterback that somebody else signed to a contract and then immediately got rid of. Like, okay, so I just want to say that. But when you look at the way that DeAndre Hopkins performed, and I could pull this up, the exact numbers, when he was with Kyler Murray, does this maybe make you think of anybody who plays for the Minnesota Vikings back in 2020? Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, 154 targets to Kyler Murray for 115 catches. That's a 75% completion percentage, 1,400 yards, 6 touchdowns. Those are numbers that we have come to expect from Justin Jefferson. So while none of this is great and none of it is perfect, I also think that some of the reasons that people cite for not wanting Kyler Murray are maybe like early career Kyler Murray. And you do have to wonder about the consistency. He's definitely not consistent. You have to wonder about the leadership, which has not shown itself in Arizona. But also, and sorry to go through my whole spiel on Kyler Murray, is Arizona any different than Carolina when Sam Darnold was there, or the Jets when Sam Darnold was there? So I think there's a reasonable argument for that if they're out on McCarthy. If internally they're saying, we just don't think there's any chance, or we think he has to sit for a whole other year, then the guy who gives you the best possible upside is Kyler Murray. If they think there's still a chance, then you start to go to those other quarterbacks like a Geno Smith or a Mac Jones that he should be able to beat out in a camp competition.
I think it's very important that you bring up the DeAndre Hopkins numbers from 2020, because I think the number one goal, maybe number two goal, number one is just to find a quarterback that can move the ball downfield, because if they had that, dare I say Sam Darnold, they're in the playoffs and we might be previewing a playoff game on here. The second is, I think with Jefferson, that's the priority. Make sure Justin Jefferson doesn't crash out and turn into AJ Brown or something, because a lot of the times this season, I think sometimes all the Justin Jefferson tension reports are kind of overblown, but like you could see it. You could see the cracks start to form in his brain where he's just like, what are we doing here? Like, what is Max Brosmer doing on a 4th and forever in Seattle, just chucking it up to try and make a play? Like, we have to find a way to do this. And for as much as you can look at McCarthy, and sometimes, I mean, I was at the Baltimore game. What I thought walking out of that game was, yeah, there are some throws that are pretty errant. The footwork isn't there, whatever. But then there are some throws, like I think he had one to Naylor. I think he had one late in the game where you're kind of like, you can work with this. And at the time, I think that was start number 3. I said, will he be better than he is right now? And I don't think that happened. I know they tailored the offense to him. I know he played more efficiently. People who will hang on to JJ McCarthy will talk about the Dallas game, right? Where he made a couple of throws. A lot of those throws could have been picked in that game, by the way, because he was using that rocket arm to try and complete passes. I just look at JJ McCarthy, and this is just my opinion with everything. You talked about, it's not fair for McCarthy to get a chance. He got more of a shot than Trey Lance. Trey Lance got 2 or 3 games with the 49ers.
Yep.
And when I hear Kevin O'Connell talk about the vertical offense, when I hear Kwesi being non-committal, it reminds me of what happened with Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis. And you also hear things on the outside, like Ben Lieber going off about the towel and the hand thing. We've made this joke before. He's not saying that if Kirk Cousins is the quarterback. So I think there are a lot of weird things going on with him. You have the 9 meme. You have the celebrating when the coaches told him not to celebrate. You had him basically holding, I don't even know how to describe it, when he pulls himself out of the game and he's like, I'm proud of myself for doing it. It's like, huh? And then, Kevin O'Connell, probably not to his fault, because in his mind, this was a big deal, mentioning the birth of his kid over and over again, unprompted, for that missed practice. Like, the vibes are off, as the kids say, when it comes to JJ McCarthy. And I think if they find a solution, and maybe even that big time trade, as you suggested, for Burrow, for Jackson, for Herbert, I think he's gone, because I think the front office has already made up his mind about him, even though they're saying the right things.
Yeah. Have they fully made up their mind? I think what they want to do is to make sure that they leave the door at least cracked open for JJ McCarthy to prove them wrong. But here's just the reality is, yes, there's all those things that were just a little bit strange this year. You make a great point. It's not that he celebrated in the end zone and his coaches told him not to. It's not just that. It's that Kevin O'Connell came out and told us that happened, which is kind of unusual, but maybe speaks to his frustration. And as you're pointing out, the number of times that he's gone back over and over to that missed practice that I truly believe he thinks cost them the game against the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, that right there, just again, sort of the frustration leaking through. And it reminds me of maybe a relationship with two people living together that's gone a little sour. And it's like, you left the toothpaste tube open again. And I just can't believe it. And you're like, it's not that big of a deal, but it's like, it's a greater amount of things that have built up. And when people talk about McCarthy, his youth is relevant. His injury, which was not his fault, is relevant. And the tools are relevant. But also, if you look at their first 10 starts between him and Christian Ponder, the quarterback rating is exactly the same. It's exactly the same. And with quarterbacks who play like this, the amount of practice and play that it would take to get from this to good is so far away. I mean, let me just read you this, just to use Kyler Murray again. Let me just read you 2024 Kyler Murray. He threw for 3,851 yards, 21 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. He ran for 5 more and had a 93.5 quarterback rating. That's like 12 wins for the Minnesota Vikings this year, if they had that level of quarterback play, right? And I'm sure that that's a major part of the frustration is it feels like Kevin O'Connell really can't get a hold of McCarthy. Like, he never knows exactly what he's going to do out there. And the last game, so I had been on the train of, you guys drafted McCarthy, you guys let go Sam Darnold, you guys need to take full, accountability for this and develop him and roll with him. And if it fails, then everybody fails together, because that's who you hitched your wagon to. But the last game after that, I thought, well, how can you ask them to do that after this? When the kid runs himself into a defender, which could clearly get you injured again, then gets a taunting penalty, which all these little things you could be like, well, this and well, that. But when there's 20 of them, you're like, okay, this is too much, right? A taunting penalty after a 9-yard run. Like, what are we doing here? It's like not sort of professional style of playing the quarterback position where you get out of bounds so you're not hurt, and then you come back to the huddle and you call the next play and you go score a dang touchdown instead of hurting your team, almost hurting yourself, and then going and having to kick a long field goal for Will Reichard. I've just been buried in stats looking at McCarthy and trying to look for, is there evidence that this can actually work? And another one too, that I'm sure drives Kevin O'Connell up the wall, is that he got sacked more times this year than Bo Nix. And he dropped back to pass about maybe 40% of what Bo Nix did this year. I mean, the number of sacks, the number of interceptions, the negative plays, the number of times you're putting yourself in danger of being injured, all that stuff. I think McCarthy was liked by his teammates. I think they love the fire that he plays with. I think they all see the tools, but I think if you went man for man, is this guy really ready to lead a franchise? Was he ever ready? The answer right now is no. And I think that's what the vibes that you're picking up on is like, this league and college or high school is nothing like those universes. And he kind of treated it like it was state, like that's like he was playing, right? He was not treating the NFL like it's the NFL this year in some instances. And I think this is where you have what they need from him to stay with that. A little bit of that comparison is, how some kids go away for summer break and then they come back and they look like a different person. I mean, that's kind of what you need from JJ McCarthy. You need him to go to summer camp or whatever, and then come back and be much more accurate, be much more in command, be able to run the full offense, be able to throw with timing, with touch, with accuracy, and then also take that next step in his maturation. And that's why I keep coming back to, I think JJ McCarthy someday can be a really good quarterback. Just like I still think Anthony Richardson someday, or I guess maybe the ship has sailed on Trey Lance, but he's still in the league. He's still in the league, all these guys. But the guys who come out, you would be hard-pressed to find a quarterback who came out with only 700 passes in college and then only threw 200 passes through his first couple years, played like this, and then the very next year was suddenly a superstar.
I think there's two, I guess, what makes me kind of leery about McCarthy long term, because I like him. I mean, I like, there's certain things that, but I mean, there's also times too. There's that quote he had when he was drafted. He said he edited his life in like 5th grade or whatever it was to be an NFL quarterback. And I sometimes wonder, did he like watch a Disney Channel movie and like saw like the enemy quarterback from the other team and like, yeah, that's how that's supposed to do. And like, instead of like going in a hole and quitting the sport or somewhere, they just lifted weights and like, went through college and all that stuff. That's what I get from McCarthy sometimes. But I mean, right now, the people who are on board with McCarthy, they'll cling to Josh Allen as a quarterback who was very inaccurate in his first 2 years and then started completing passes. You mentioned this on your podcast. Coincidentally, that's when Stephon Diggs arrived. And the other quarterback that I don't think Vikings fans are going to like this, but Jordan Love. But still, you look at Jordan Love, he had 1,125 career attempts at Utah State. He threw the ball all over the place. They gave him 2 or 3 years. And by the way, he was healthy that entire time behind Aaron Rodgers. It wasn't, his knee wasn't hurt. He didn't bang his hand on helmets, all of those things. It gets me to a point with the front office because I'm getting a little leery here because I'm getting 2021 Vikings vibes where it's every man for himself, the Spielman Zimmer era where everybody's trying to save their jobs. If they trade for Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, or Justin Herbert, it's a different category because I feel like you're going for it.
Oh, yeah.
But when it comes to this team, I feel they look at themselves and they see the 2019 Tampa Bay Buccaneers because that team went 7-9. They had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. They had a very good defense that had Antoine Winfield, Carlton Davis, Shaq Barrett. I think Ndamukong Suh was in the trenches, even though he was like in his 30s or whatever. Very good team. Their quarterback was Jameis Winston, who threw for 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, but he also threw 30 interceptions, which kind of negated all of that. I think the Vikings look at themselves. They have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison.
Probably still.
Yeah.
Probably still for next year. Yeah.
Just that. I don't really want to get into the arrest. Just stop breaking law. Please. Just stop. That's all I want. Your offensive line should be better than it was last year. Your defense was in the top 10 of scoring and yardage at the end of this year. And, the one thing that plan had was perfect timing because Tom Brady became available. He was a free agent. He was able to be courted. I look around and I don't see that Tom Brady, except for one name you didn't mention, and that's Aaron Rodgers. And by no means do I want it to happen. It's a retread. It's all of those things. But I mean, I think that front office is looking. They need to save their job. They feel like they have the bones of a Super Bowl team. They want to find Tom Brady. I don't know if it's Kirk Cousins. I don't know if you make another phone call to Aaron Rodgers, like, Happy Gilmore to Chubbs, like, you were right, I was wrong, so on. Like, I feel like this team is going to try and take the biggest swing possible. And if it's Kyler Murray, it's Kyler Murray. But I don't think you can slam the door on Cousins or Aaron Rodgers either.
it feels that way. And I think you make a great point. And this is why when I say, the world is not fair to JJ McCarthy, because in a just world, he would be drafted by a team that could either develop him behind the scenes slowly, or he could, get into games and play and learn for a team that had no real stakes. That was like the Tennessee Titans this year, although they fired their coach. So I guess they felt they had some stakes, but that they're a clown show. You understand what I'm saying? That a team like when Fernando Mendoza goes to the Raiders, they're going to have high expectations, but they're also going to know that you can't just ask Mendoza to be a megastar right away and that he's going to get time. Caleb Williams, I know, again, people got fired, but a good example of a franchise in a bigger picture. Eberflus was just really bad as a head coach, but in a bigger picture that could develop Caleb Williams, where you are locked into 3 seasons of him. You're not going to make a change. You're not going to pull him. You're not going to soft bench or hard bench or any kind of bench. You're playing Caleb Williams. And if it goes bust, it goes bust, but it's going to go bust over 3 years, right? McCarthy, if he was in a similar spot, and it almost seems like Atlanta's willing to do this with Michael Penix as well, then I think we could be much more patient with it in the way we talk about it. So in a best case scenario, you mentioned Jordan Love, that would be him. It would be developing behind the scenes for 3 years or whatever. That's just not realistic with the Minnesota Vikings 2026. And to your point, biggest swing possible. And that's why I continue to bring up Kyler Murray, because you're right that, well, there are differences between 2021 and right now. And the real sick irony of 2021 is it might have been Kirk Cousins' best season as a Vikings quarterback. And they were playing Bashad Breeland and Cam Dantzler. And I don't know, Tashawn Bauer showed up at one point, and the injuries were absolutely out of this world on defense. But they didn't have the bodies. They have the bodies on this team right now. And a Kyler Murray move feels so much like Sam Darnold to me that it's like, well, we did it with that guy who was an experienced quarterback around the same age, who the entire world said, nah, that guy sees ghosts. He must suck. And it's the same thing with Kyler Murray. Well, the whole world. And does that not sound like Kevin O'Connell saying, I'm going to show, or Mac Jones, I'm going to show that this guy could be a real starter under me, the quarterback whisperer. And I'm also going to show it was JJ McCarthy's fault, not mine. But to your point about, the front office coaching, I think that they are all and should be tied together. There's a lot of whose fault was it anyway? Well, this was Kwesi's plan. Well, KOC's the quarterback whisperer. Well, the Wilfs will never tank and all this stuff. And, I may have thrown that out there a time or two, but in reality, they all agreed. We sat down at the owners' meetings with Mark Wilf, and he said, the reason we're not getting Aaron Rodgers is because we believe in what we saw from JJ McCarthy in 2024 training camp and behind the scenes. And to me, that means all of you are responsible for what happened. On Aaron Rodgers, though, the hard part for me is I just don't think he played that much better football than JJ McCarthy. I know by some metrics he did, but there's no running. So like McCarthy had, I think, 4 touchdowns rushing, 100-something yards rushing. He at least even the score a little bit that way. And you couldn't really throw the ball down the field consistently. You couldn't have Rodgers sitting in the pocket for more than 2.3 seconds. And you saw what happened when they had a D-line that was good. It just ate them alive in the playoff game. I still don't see that as a viable option. I think that you're either looking for someone who's in their mid-20s or it's Kirk. And the argument for Kirk would be, even if you look how Kirk played this year, he still played so much better than the quarterback play that they got. If he was here, they're in the playoffs. I also don't really subscribe to that line of thinking, because the reason they moved on from Kirk was because they didn't feel like there was a ceiling there. So now if you're shifting to, we always chase Super Bowls, which is what they've said, to actually we're chasing just saving our jobs, then it is like 2021. Then I would agree with you.
It's almost like, Kirk Cousins is just destined to be this franchise's Gordie Howe, who just played hockey until his 50s, gets checked into the boards and maybe pisses himself. But I mean, hey, we're going to win 9 games in the hunt, right? I don't know. I mean, it does feel like they're going down a slippery slope. But I mean, there's plenty of things to talk about, and we'll get to Brian Flores in just a second. I do have to shout out Underdog right now, though. Get our sponsors some love here, because the Vikings aren't in the playoffs, but you can still get in the action at Underdog Fantasy. Playing Underdog is easy. Just pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower on stats like rushing yards, receptions, touchdowns, and more. I've been playing Underdog for years, and I'll tell you just how easy it is. Every morning, there's some football. I'm on the app. I'm having some coffee, some breakfast, making some entries. We got 4 games this weekend, divisional weekend. It's one of the best weekends of football of the year. You can craft your own entry for each game by picking a couple with higher or lower. Plus, there's team picks, game picks, boosts, gimme picks, where you can win all sorts of money. They make it very easy. You just download the app today, sign up with the promo code The Age, which is all one word, and you score $75 in bonus entries when you play your first $5. That is promo code The Age. Underdog, make picks, win money. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/play and get terms _DFS_.html for details. Offers not valid in Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. If you are concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. And in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. All right. So we hammered the quarterback position a ton, as we were apt to do. The most immediate storyline going on right now is Brian Flores. He is a free agent. They've apparently been negotiating with him throughout the season, hasn't signed. Kevin O'Connell has said there's a lot of confidence that Flores will come back. Also said their relationship is super strong. Since then, Flores has been requested for a head coaching interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers and has been interviewed for the Washington Commanders defensive coordinator job. This is weird. I'm just going to say it. What's going on with Brian Flores, and what % chance do you have of him coming back to the Vikings next year?
It is weird. I can't think of another time where a coordinator was a free agent and the open bidding season. Maybe somebody else in your comment section can remember one, but offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, I just can't recall somebody letting their contract run out and then being able to take lateral moves wherever the heck they wanted, which should raise eyebrows. I mean, I know that there's always the person in every comment section who's like, you guys are making too much of something. This one, I don't even know what you would use to try to justify that, because there has to be a reason that Brian Flores decided in training camp, coming off a 14-win season, why he would not sign a contract extension with the Vikings. Wes Phillips signed, and Kevin O'Connell signed, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah signed, and yet not him. And I could speculate, and this is what we do, right? Try to figure out, well, is it something behind the scenes? And I saw John Krasinski of The Athletic kind of said, I mean, use your common sense here, folks. Guys don't become free agents who are coordinators, right? It just doesn't happen. So there has to be something that is not matching up for him or for them. And O'Connell has said they're trying to be very aggressive. They're trying to keep him around, and yet not still here already says he had a reason for doing this because he wanted to look elsewhere and see what was out there for him. And of course, head coaching jobs, we all know he's going to take one if he gets that opportunity, and we'll see if that actually happens. It's the lateral move that if that were to happen, and even taking the interview with Washington makes you go, why? And there's sort of like a easiest possible explanation, and then there's ones that get a lot more maybe bleak for the Vikings organization. There's the obvious explanation, which is if you were to go to a team like Washington, they've got Jaden Daniels. They're going to have a chance to compete for the Super Bowl in the next couple of years. That is a team that is more on the rise still, despite this fall off this year with Daniels getting injured. Still more on the rise with a quarterback who's shown he can do it. They just need a guy to turn around their defense. The offense will very likely do their job with Daniels if he stays healthy. that makes a lot of sense. And it also makes a lot of sense that you could look at this ship and say it's in pretty choppy waters. And as we're having this discussion about maybe going to get Kyler Murray, or maybe going to trade for Mac Jones, or maybe bringing in Aaron Rodgers, that sounds to me like you could go from being the hot candidate, the one who just got this team to 9-8 because of your great defense, to if it slips a little and you miss the playoffs, to everybody's out and there goes your candidacy. Washington, D.C., or a place like Dallas would put him a lot more in the spotlight if they turn around because of who their quarterbacks are, because of how often they're on national TV. The Vikings will not be on national TV. And this is a guy who's suing the NFL, who would love his lawsuit talked about on TV all the time. Like, those are kind of obvious explanations. But if it's something else, because I know from the players to a man, everyone that I've spoken to on and off the record has spoken extremely highly of Brian Flores and their experience working with him. So I don't think it's that. Is it the distribution of power? Does he want to be an assistant coach, which now Mike Pettin has retired? So is that something that they're offering him? Does he want to have a much larger say in terms of personnel, which it's kind of seemed to me like he's had a pretty big say on personnel, but that could always be bigger. There could always be more power to be taken. And there is a connection, I believe, with him. I forget what it is in Washington, someone he was with the Patriots with. There's another part of this too. Talk about Captain Obvious explanations. The last one I mentioned, Josh Harris is worth $11 billion. That's a lot of billions of dollars. In fact, if you think about how much 100 million is, and then how much 1 billion is, and then 11 of those, that's how much Josh Harris is worth. That's a lot. So he might be willing, when you think about the Wilfs and how much cash they've spent on the roster and their coach, and then they sign the GM too, do they want to give a head coach's salary to a defensive coordinator? That may be where the rubber meets the road too. So there's like different versions of this. And because Flores is pretty tight-lipped, and because, O'Connell has really presented a united front with Flores, I'm more apt to believe the more obvious explanations, like a team on the rise makes more sense than a team that is hoping to keep its head above water, and a team with ownership that has endless dollars might be able to jack up the price to a point where you could say, well, he's already got a lot of money. But I mean, if you're talking about a lot more money, then there might be a difference there.
And also, too, you mentioned the head coach. I mean, he wants to be a head coach. He doesn't want to be Vic Fangio, defensive coordinator, until, he's 70 and can't walk or whatever. I think Vic Fangio walks just fine. But I mean, I'm just making the metaphor here. Brian Flores wants to be a head coach again. And I think a position like Dallas would make a lot of sense for him, where he would be working under Jerry Jones. Maybe that's a thing, buddy up, one of the most powerful people in the NFL, just kind of like, hey, I know he's suing the lead, but he's really good. I've seen him, work in front of him, the, front row seat. Maybe that helps him get a head coaching job. You also look at the Vikings right now. If they aren't good, like you mentioned, teams aren't going to come calling. He'll have another one, and he'll be doing this for another 2 or 3 years, building up another infrastructure so he can have a top 5 defense. So I don't know. It just seems weird. Everybody wants to go down the tension route, but like you said too, this is just a unique situation where a coordinator's contract runs out. He's a free agent. He's talking to other teams. And, if he leaves, then what happens? Like, does a guy like Andrew Van Ginkel, whose role is tailor-made for Brian Flores, does he get traded? Does Dallas Turner go into a starting role? I think it could be a very big domino that sends this whole offseason into a whole nother state of chaos, even though it's already in a state of chaos with the quarterback position. So buckle up.
Yeah. Chaos and the Vikings. I don't know. This is very new to all of us, isn't it? Never knew. But they have their guy in-house, and that's Durante Jones, who, for my money, has been extremely valuable to this team. And this is from myself having conversations with Harrison Smith about this over the last couple of years, because he has advocated strongly for Durante Jones as being one of the reasons that he came back. It's not just Brian Flores. It's just that people know Brian Flores a lot more. He's a lot more front-facing. But Durante was actually hired by Mike Zimmer and then returned. Did he return under Donatel and was kept here? Like, there's a lot of I got to think about that. But there's a lot of respect for Durante Jones around the NFL as you see him getting interviews with the New York Jets. You see him getting interviews with the Dallas Cowboys for their defensive coordinator positions. I've heard from, some other teams that have him on their radar eventually down the road if he's still available. So I have always heard very, very, very good things about Durante and his chances of being in DC. So the issue here is really timing. I mean, if you're Durante Jones and the Jets, just say, for example, the Jets say, we want you, Durante Jones, to be our DC. But then the Vikings say, hey, if you could just wait like a couple more weeks so we can figure out what's going on with Brian Flores. Well, no, I'm going to go take a DC job somewhere else. Right. And that is where it becomes very tricky is when will they have an answer? And should they start? And I've gotten this question from fans. I'm sure you have too. When should they start interviewing other DCs? I mean, should they get, Jonathan Gannon or Raheem Morris in here or, somebody else from some other team? I've wondered about Wink Martindale works for Michigan. I think if there would be any discussion there, because I know that O'Connell has a lot of respect for his very aggressive blitzing style. Like you got to start doing something sometime. You can't wait forever for Brian Flores. You kind of need a cutoff date so you can figure out what you're doing at defensive coordinator too.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Jones's profile right now. So he was the defensive. He's got a whole bunch of college experience. There's Wisconsin, there's Hawaii, there's UCLA, Boise State. It looks like a CFB 26 dynasty, which is quite impressive. But started in the NFL with the Miami Dolphins assistant defensive backs coach, went to Cincinnati. The Vikings hired him for the DBs coach role in 2020. Then he went to LSU for a year as the defensive coordinator there. Came back to Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell's staff in 2022.
Okay,
has been the defensive passing game coordinator since 2023. So that would be a huge loss as well. Like there's just so many moving parts. And before I let you go, I just got one more question for you because everything's up in the air. It's so uncertain. Non-quarterback related. What is your biggest prediction for the you can go into the crystal ball if you want to, but what is your biggest prediction when it comes to the 2026 Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, see, non-quarterback. Are there non-quarterback subjects that we can talk about here?
Sorry, go ahead.
So, because it is a little bit, I think if you were trying to get bold, you could say they're going to trade away Jordan Addison and have Jalen Naylor signed to an extension, which I don't think is a bad idea necessarily. But if you start doing the economics of that, like Addison's got 1 year left on his contract for $4 million. And Naylor would probably have to be signed at least 10 if you judge it from Tutu Atwell or Diami Brown last offseason. So how do you really make that work? And can Naylor really be a number 2 wide receiver? It was trespassing. It wasn't homicide. Like, it's just, I know that there's a pattern of behavior. You don't have to tell me, but it's not like this was a heinous crime that was committed. So allegedly committed, I should say. But, the point being that if I'm not going with that route, that seems pretty obvious. I would say that they have to draft a center and that if they're going to that's number one. Because I just think that, you can have Blake Brandel fill that spot. There aren't really any free agents that are going to be affordable. Linderbaum is probably going for $20 million. The other one would be either Breece Hall or Travis Etienne. I think at the running back position, it's time to get someone a little younger, a little more explosive, who is an all-around type of back. And you might be willing to spend, and then they're going to move money around. I know people say, they don't have any cap space. They do. It's just not right now. They will, I promise. I think running back is a place to be bold because they improved their running game significantly this year. It didn't matter because going from 27th to 13th in EPA in rushing doesn't mean that much of a difference when you don't have any passing game. But I think that the offensive line, if healthy, with maybe a top 2 round type of center, added with Darisaw getting healthy, Will Fries being healthy for the whole offseason, you could have a serious offensive line that could run block. And if you get a explosive running back in there, they could actually lean on the run game in ways that they have never done with Kevin O'Connell. So I think if I'm being even slightly bold, it's that I think that there's a big move to be made at the running back position.
And we have a ton of time to talk about all of that this offseason with running backs, defensive line, offensive line, the quarterback situation, even the coaching staff potentially. Purple Insider is the place to get all of your news there. What's going on? What do you got cooking over there?
Same thing as you, man. Same thing as you. Just these couple of subjects have really dominated the entire week. But my hope is that in the coming weeks to get into stuff like we were just talking about there a little more at the end of, like what are other free agents? What are other moves? Will they keep TJ Hockenson? I think probably the answer is yes, with a restructure, but I don't know for sure. What will they do if there's a move to be made with Jordan Addison? I asked Kwesi about that at the press conference, and I mean, he acknowledged that these things matter. So yeah, man, it's podcasting and writing and watching other teams play in the playoffs.
And of course, I got a whole bunch of stuff as well over at zonecoverage.com. That's where my Vikings work is. A little bit of Twins work, a lot of Wild work as well. And if you want to see what's going on around the NFC North, the Bears are still playing. We got the Windy City for Chicago Bears news, Dairyland Express for Green Bay Packers news, and Detroit Jock City for Detroit Lions news. But of course, because this is the Viking Age podcast, I have to shout them out over there, thevikingage.com. We got stuff on TJ Hawkinson's future. We got stuff on Adam Thielen's future, Jordan Addison's arrest. Never a dull moment with the Minnesota Vikings. So, of course, Matthew, thank you for coming on the Viking Age podcast, the official podcast of thevikingage.com. We do this right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. And however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. I am Chris Schad at The Real Chris Schad. He is Matthew Coller at Matthew Coller. Correct? There,
yeah.
Yes. I always, you make this joke too. I always feel like there's NFL after it, but then I'm like, no, he's the guy that made the joke. There's no NFL.
I made fun of that. Also, you just pronounced your name in two different ways. Is it pronounced differently on Twitter?
So here's there's a story behind this, and I think I've said it on, but I'll repeat it again. So when I was in high school, my friends and I were watching an NBA game, and Ahmad Rashad was on the TV. Yeah. So like somebody just pointed at the TV, and like we're in high school at this point, so they're like, "Oh, Ahmad Rashad." So people started calling me Ahmad Rashad.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then Ahmad got dropped, so then people would just call me Rashad, and then that kind of stuck. So it was like, I don't know if there's a fake Rashad or something. I think somebody had Rashad as a Twitter handle, so I just went with it. So it's very confusing. Like,
but it's Schad though, right? Not Schad.
It is Schad. I do remember my parents told me. I'll tell this story before we go off here too. But we had my parents went to parent teacher conferences. And the teacher sat down and, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Schad. And it like went on for like 10 minutes. And like finally mom's like, it's Schad. She's like, huh? So yes.
I always thought it was Schad, but then you said it two different ways. And I'm like, now I don't know.
Yes. It's Schad, whatever you want. I am not picky. But of course, Chris Schad, Matthew Coller, Viking Age podcast. And as we sign off all the time, 4 letters, 1 word, Skull.